Dr. McAllister, in the past, did CTR take a more active role in commenting on scientific issues relating to smoking and health?
In the early days, they did, yes.
Did you review any of the materials that have been marked in evidence in trial here relating to those activities?
Yes, I have.
What conclusions did you reach based on your review of that material?
I saw that they were always truthful. There was nothing that was said that did not reflect the facts, and they were describing research that CTR was undertaking.
Did you find any factual misstatement in any of that material?
No factual misstatements.
Now, does CTR issue press releases today?
Only in conjunction with the release of the annual report.
Does CTR have a public relations department?
No.
Do other organizations have public relations departments or functions?
Yeah, a number of other funding agencies do. American Heart Association, American Lung Association, National Institutes of Health even has brochures and journals they put out.
In your opinion, is that inconsistent with their mission?
No, no, not at all.
Now, Dr. McAllister, at my request, did you review certain exhibits and evidence in this trial that were company internal memoranda that discussed CTR?
Yes, I did.
And do those memorandum include suggestions how to modify CTR or its research program?
Oh, yeah, they do.
Were any of those suggestions implemented?
No.
Were any of those suggestions implemented in a way that would have caused CTR to diverge from its mission to conduct scientific research into all phases of tobacco and health?
No, not at all.
Is there anything in those documents that leads you to believe that CTR was not fulfilling its stated mission?
No, sir.
Dr. McAllister, I'm just going to hand you Exhibit 18 of evidence, which is Frank's statement. Now, at my request, did you read the Frank statement and make an effort to form a view as to whether the statements pertaining to TIRC, the predecessor to CTR, were true?
I did.
As part of the Frank statement, the industry pledged that through CTR, or TIRC, it would aid and assist the research effort into all phases of tobacco use in health. Has CTR done that?
I believe so, yes, they have.
As part of the Frank statement, the industry pledged that it would pick a scientific director, a scientist of unimpeachable integrity and national repute. Did that happen?
Yes, Dr. C.C. Little was definitely such a person.
And has that pledge been kept with respect to the other scientists who have led CTR?
Yes, it has.
The industry also stated in the Frank statement that there would be an advisory board of scientists disinterested in the cigarette industry who would advise the committee on its research activities. Has that happened?
Certainly, and obviously continues today.
And the industry said that the members of the scientific advisory board would be a distinguished group from medicine, science, and education. Did that take place?
Certainly did.
And finally, has CTR cooperated closely with those whose task it is to safeguard the public health?
Yes, indeed they have.
Dr. McAllister, based on your knowledge, your experience, your work in scientific research and with funding organizations over the past 30 years, has CTR contributed to the advancement of science and the advancement of knowledge relating to issues of tobacco use and health.
Absolutely. I reiterate what I said before. I'm proud to have been associated with it.
Thank you, Dr. McAllister.
Cross?
Your Honor, we have a sidebar for that.
All right. All right, have a seat, please. You want to make a proffer? Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. McAllister, I just have a few areas we have to cover here. You testified earlier during direct examination about the credentials of past SAB members. Dr. McAllister, what is your opinion about the reputation and integrity of those past SAB members?
I think it was very high. I know it was very high.
And how did it compare to advisory boards that have worked with other funding organizations?
In general, their qualifications for any single group are high. That's not to say that other funding agencies don't have highly qualified people on their boards. They do. But to have such a high concentration of such highly qualified people at the tops of their profession is in fact unusual.
Now, Dr. McAllister, at my request, you reviewed certain materials relating to special projects, correct?
Yes, I did.
Would you just describe for the record what it is that you did to conduct that review?
I took a random sample of the financial files. I reviewed the publications that resulted from that special projects effort, and I saw at least half of the financial files that had correspondence and financial information.
Now, based on your review of that material, what conclusions did you reach concerning whether there were any limitations placed on researchers who received special project funds with respect to their right to publish?
I detected no limitation.
Now, as part of the special project process, how were special project recipients notified of their awards?
There was a letter that came from the president that notified them of their award.
Dr. McAllister, I'm going to hand you what has been pre-marked as Defendant's Exhibit 12165. Can you identify this document for the record?
This is a letter from Mr. Gertenbach, president of CTR, to Dr. Alvin Feinstein at Yale, confirming that money that he required for his project would be provided. It also says that the records are designating the undertaking as a special project of the Council for Tobacco Research instead of a grant and aid. And if a credit line was inserted on any future publications, it should be so worded as so to avoid this being confused with the grant program of the Scientific Advisory Board.
Is this letter typical of the letters that were sent to special project recipients?
Yes, this is very similar to the ones that I found.
And this letter was prepared at or near the time that a special project recipient would be advised of the award?
That is the way that I found it, yes.
And it was a regular practice, based on your review of the files for CTR, to compose such a letter and send it to the recipient?
Yes.
And was it a regular practice of CTR to maintain a copy of this letter in its files?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion about the quality of the researchers who received special project funding?
we already did that. What's that question asked and allowed?
Quality of the
The researchers?
researchers. The researchers.
This is as the special.
As the special projects.
Special project, okay, go ahead.
These researchers, more often than not, were affiliated with good institutions. A number of the special projects went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton. The researchers were certainly qualified to do the work, and in some cases were very well were regarded very highly in their fields.
Based on your review of the special projects materials, did you form an opinion about the quality of the research that was funded through CTR special projects?
As evidenced by the publications that came out, I found it to be sound, scientifically sound.
Dr. McAllister, I'm going to hand you what has been marked as plaintiff's exhibit 462 in evidence. Can you just identify that document for the record?
I believe this to be a list of the special projects administered by the CTR. I believe this was submitted to the Waxman Committee.
Does Exhibit 462 contain identification of the journals in which these various research results were published?
It does.
Are those journals generally peer-reviewed journals?
Yes.
Dr. McAllister, do you know whether that is an absolutely complete list of all publications that resulted from CTR special projects?
In fact, I believe it mentions that it's not necessarily a complete list. It was best that could be come up with.
So, in other words, it's under-inclusive of publications.
Yes, definitely.
Dr. McAllister, in your review of the CTR special projects files, did you see any evidence that the special projects publications or research results were interfered with or suppressed in any way?
I did not.
Did you see anything that suggested to you that there was any false information being promulgated into the scientific literature through CTR special projects?
No, I did not.
That concludes my proffer, Your Honor.
We just wanted to state for the record, Your Honor, to clarify one matter. The witness testified that he's reviewed at least half of the financial files with all correspondence. That's something we certainly never received. I just wanted that to be clear.
All right, 1 o'clock. Same rules apply, Doctor. Let's not discuss testimony. Of course, you have lunch with them if you like, or speak about anything in the world.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, before we bring the jury in, just two matters about during that direct examination, I had offered two documents, one of which was objected to, the other one was not objected to. I don't think I moved it into
You did not.
I'd like to do that at this time.
Okay.
This defendant's 14521 is the letter from Dr. Hopkins to Dr. Hammond.
Okay, that'll be admitted. The other will be marked for identification purposes only. Make sure the court gets the right copy of what.
Secondly, I just wanted to correct the record with respect to the statement Mrs. Rosenblatt had made this morning concerning document production of special projects documents by CTR. In fact, there were two productions made by CTR related to special projects. The one we discussed at sidebar this morning was the initial production made at the outset of the case, which was a negotiated production of what we would produce in the way of reports relating to special projects. That was accomplished at the end of 1993. However, with respect to a subsequent request for documentation on March 10, 1997, prior to the disclosure of witnesses in this case, CTR produced its entire files relating to special projects to plaintiff's counsel, subject to a listing of a limited number of documents that were with respect to, with which plaintiff privilege was made with respect to, and a production log for privilege was made at the same time. So, just so the record is clear, we have produced all correspondence and the like that CTR has in its files, and that was done in March of this year.
I don't think it's accurate, because I did not see financial files with correspondence. I mean, that's just, and maybe those are items that they indicated a privilege to, I don't know, but, I mean, I just stated that for the record to clarify, at least that's my understanding, but certainly we never had an opportunity to cross-examine the witness.
Okay.
There were 9 boxes of materials.
All right, let's proceed. Bring jury.
Bring the jury. Bringing in the jury. Jurors entering the courtroom.
All right, have a seat, folks. Where is that document, sir, that we just discussed? The one that's supposed to be the marked in evidence? Yeah, make sure that she knows which one it is, please.
Mr. I believe they're back here.
All right, one is marked for ID and one is marked for evidence. Okay. Unless he needs it, you can hold it. All right, you ready?
Yes, Judge.
All right, proceed.
Dr. McAllister, you were at Wayne State University for what, about 16 years?
That's correct.
When college professors use the concept of tenure, what exactly does that mean? When someone says they are a tenured professor at a university, what does that mean?
That means that they cannot be released for any reason other than moral turpitude or financial exigency.
Okay, in other words, once a professor has tenure, he's really got a lock on the job, unless he does something hard.
I would accept your terminology.
Okay. Now, what are the designations? There's assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. Is there anything else as to how professors are characterized?
Only as adjunct, but in the tenure track, so-called, the 3 that you've mentioned are the typical ones.
Okay.
Not in every university, but that's typical.
Okay. Now, when you began at Wayne State University, you were an assistant professor of chemistry, correct?
That's correct.
And 16 years later, when you left, you were still an assistant professor.
No, I was director of the Office for Institutional Research.
Okay, but I mean, had your designation as a professor ever changed?
No.
Okay, so in that sense, when you left Wayne State, in terms of your professor title, you were still an assistant professor of chemistry.
Yes.
Okay. You went to undergraduate school in North Carolina, and you did your postgraduate work in North Carolina?
No, undergraduate and graduate school in North Carolina.
Okay, that's right. Postgrad was at the University of Kentucky.
And the University of Michigan Medical School, yes.
Okay. Now, is it fair to say that your focus at the University of Kentucky was basically studying how cells make proteins. I mean, it was a very technical area, wasn't it?
I guess in some sense, all science is technical. We were studying how cells make proteins in response to messenger RNA from the genetic message brought from the nucleus, DNA.
I mean, that obviously had nothing to do with any issues relating to tobacco and health, correct?
Only insofar as it related to cancer, which is associated with tobacco.
Now, when you left Wayne State University, you went directly to the Council for Tobacco Research. That was in 1983,
Yes, sir.
and obviously you've been there ever since, and you're there today.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you first went with the Council for Tobacco Research, who was the president?
Mr. Tom Hoyt.
And then he only remained president for a relatively brief time after you came, and then I believe Mr. Gertenbach became president in 1984. At least that's what he testified to.
That's probably very close. I would certainly trust his testimony. When
Okay.
Mr. Hoyt retired, Mr. Gertenbach.
Now, according to Mr. Gertenbach's testimony, he's retired now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He left the Council for Tobacco Research at the very end of 1992. Does that sound right to you?
It's probably close, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, Gertenbach was president from when to when, approximately?
I think it was 1984 until he left, or 85. Did he say 84? I would take whatever
He said he came in 84, left at the very end of 92.
I believe he came before then to CTR. I'm talking about his presidency, I believe, was in 1984. He was there earlier. He was actually there when I arrived in 83, but not as president.
Okay. Now, prior to the time that you took the job with the Council for Tobacco Research, you had never yourself performed any direct research on smoking and health issues, had you?
Not on smoking, only with health effects of smoking, diseases associated with smoking, but not with smoking itself. Yes, sir.
You don't smoke, your wife doesn't smoke, your two sons don't smoke, your brothers don't smoke, correct?
That's correct.
Was that an objection? A little late, over.
And that's not just a coincidence, is it? I mean, isn't it a fact that you and your wife and your sons and your brothers don't smoke because you've all basically concluded that smoking's not good for your health?
I think he can testify about himself.
Okay. Isn't it true that you don't smoke? At least one of the factors that has gone into your choice not to smoke is because you're convinced that smoking is not good for your health.
Mr. Rosenblatt, in my own particular case, it was because I had asthma, and I was uncomfortable around cigarette smoke, and I occasionally, I knew that would not be good for me to smoke.
Did you ever get over the asthma, or was that?
Yes, I did.
How old were you about?
Probably 14, but I still had episodes. That was my last really serious attack of asthma. I still had shortness of breath and wheezing even into today.
But you're saying that's the reason that you never took up smoking?
That's the reason that I personally never took up smoking.
questions about a frank statement to cigarette smokers. And as I've understood your testimony, with respect to a frank statement, the essence of it was that you feel the Council for Tobacco Research has been true to the promise made to the American people by the tobacco industry in 1954.
I do believe that.
Okay. Can you see this far?
You'll have to help me out. I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Now, obviously, the general concern and the reason this was published is there were the mouse studies, and there was a tremendous amount of publicity, and people were concerned, hey, does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer? And this is what that addressed. Is that correct?
There's a question. Over. If you're going to object, stand up.
Don't encourage it.
Go ahead.
Is that correct? That's essentially what it addressed.
That is addressed in the preamble to the Frank statement.
Okay. Regardless of the record of the past, the fact that cigarette smoking today should even be suspected as a cause of a serious disease is a matter of deep concern to us. Many people have asked us what we are doing to meet the public's concern aroused by the recent reports. Here is the answer. You would agree, would you not, that the public's concern that is being addressed in the Frank statement, the public's concern is, does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer? That's what the public is concerned about, and that's what the public wants to know.
That's not what that refers to specifically. I don't know what it refers to specifically. That's not what it says. It just says concerns.
Well, in context, go back to the first sentence. Recent reports on experiments with mice have given wide publicity to a theory that cigarette smoking is in some way linked with lung cancer in human beings. And isn't the whole thrust of the Frank statement that the tobacco industry is telling the American people, we're good corporate citizens, we're concerned about this too. Does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer in human beings? And isn't, in context, when it says many people have asked us what we are doing to meet the public's concern aroused by the recent reports, don't you agree that the public concern that's being referred to is the concern about the question of whether cigarette smoking causes lung cancer?
In context, yes, sir.
Okay.
I do.
Okay. Well, you haven't answered that question. It's 43 years later. And you haven't answered that question. Whether cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. In your mind and in the mind of the tobacco industry, that's still an open question. We don't know. It may. Isn't that true?
Not exactly, Mr. Rosenblatt. Cause is a tricky word, and it has to be taken in context. As epidemiologists talk about cause, an epidemiological association is enough. In terms of what a scientist wants to know about cause, smoking is not sufficient for those diseases by itself, nor it's neither necessary nor sufficient. People get those diseases without cigarette smoking. There's no question that somewhere everyone talks about cause in a different way, and in the context of an everyday man-in-the-street kind of definition of cause, sure, cigarettes cause lung cancer. An epidemiologist's reflection, yes. In terms of a scientist who wants to know what is the pathway, what is the mechanism, you haven't established the cause. So you really have to talk about cause in context as well.
You would agree the word the tobacco industry chose to use was the word cause that I read. And my question to you is a limited question. I understand you've defined cause as a highly scientific term, not the man or woman in the street concept of cause. I'm simply saying to you that your definition of cause, does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer, which was posed 43 years ago in a frank statement, is still an open question scientifically. It has not been proven.
Not exactly, Mr. Rosenblatt. I said I accept the epidemiologist's concept of cause in the epidemiologist's sense, and I admit that. In the epidemiologist's sense, smoking causes cancer. In a scientist's quest for exactly how things happen, the mechanism by which they happen, that's true. We still don't know the exact link. That doesn't mean that the other definition is wrong.
Well, help me out. Does cigarette smoking cause cancer or does it?
Which definition would you like me to use?
The
Mr.
normal, everyday Webster dictionary definition of cause. Does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer or doesn't?
In the everyday interpretation, we now have enough epidemiological evidence over these years to assume that public health measures, it's reasonable to take public health measures in response to that, to those findings. That if I, as a scientist in a laboratory, say we still don't know the exact cause, that's still true. That doesn't mean that the other actions don't take place or shouldn't take place.
Dr. McAllister, I've asked you a very simple question. If you're unable to answer it, just tell me. The question is, does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer or doesn't it? Never got an answer, Judge.
Well, he has and he hasn't. He has it as the ordinary dictionary, everyday definition, yes or no. He didn't get the yes or no. So if that's what he's looking for,
That's what I'm
he's
looking
entitled to that.
Your Honor, witness has to provide whatever that definition is. He's offered definition. He doesn't
The witness
know.
can speak for himself.
Does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer or doesn't it?
In the epidemiologist framework, sure. In the common, everyday terms, does smoking cause cancer? Not thinking of it scientifically, you can accept that. Yes, it does. I have to admit I don't know dictionaries, or I don't know what the dictionary says. But I'm saying that you can honestly have two definitions of cause that are not mutually exclusive.
Isn't it true, Dr. McAllister, that every medical doctor listed on the exhibit you were shown on direct examination, who is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Council for Tobacco Research, believes and has stated publicly that they believe cigarette smoking causes lung cancer and other diseases? Or are you telling us that there is a single medical doctor on your scientific advisory board who says that it has not been scientifically established that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer?
I think if they were approached the same way as I approached it, I think they would agree with me. There is no doubt in the part of these medical doctors or even these Ph.D.s and D.Phils, there's no doubt that the association is very strong, that public health measures need to be taken. Physicians can't wait for the final word about what a cause is. They have to take actions, and they would recommend those actions could be taken. I don't think, however, that they would disagree with me that we haven't found the actual link.
I'm not asking you about finding the actual link or finding the actual specific mechanism. I'm simply asking you, can you name, forget this list, can you name a single medical doctor anywhere in this country who has never received 10 cents from the tobacco industry, who will state publicly that he or she doesn't believe that it has been scientifically established that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer?
If by scientifically established you mean epidemiological association, of course not. There's not one.
Counsel had asked you if you had reviewed the various Surgeon General's reports. Let me ask you a question about something that appears in the 1979 Surgeon General's report on the very first page, Roman numeral 1, at the very beginning, the Secretary's forward. On January 11, 1964, the first Surgeon General's report on smoking and health was published. It created an instant and justified worldwide reaction. For the report, a document of impeccable scientific authority established a frightening link between cigarette smoking and several disabling or fatal diseases. The report established that cigarette smoking is causally related to lung cancer in men. My question to you, Dr. McAllister, that was in 1964. Do you agree with it today?
I'm sorry, sir?
It's the 79 Surgeon General's report, but in the very first paragraph, the Secretary's forward refers to the 64 Surgeon General's report. And the report it's taught, the 1960, the report established that cigarette smoking is causally related to lung cancer in men. That was way back in 1964. Do you agree with that today?
Do I agree that the 1964 report established it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I think it didn't establish it. I think the results that were out there already were clear. I don't think the report itself established it. The report suggested it. I think the report was the first time that they brought all of those things together. And again, I remind you, CTR scientists and publications were a big part of that report. That the first time that they came together, the Surgeon General made that statement. The Surgeon General in 1964 said, establishing causation is at best a subjective procedure. I'm not sure, I may not be quoting exactly. But he says, on balance, for a variety of reasons, I believe that cigarette smoking is causally associated with lung cancer. But he admitted that in that statement he admitted that that's a subjective decision. He said, the Surgeon General said that. And his subjective decision was, on balance of evidence, yes, cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. And I certainly don't agree with the Surgeon General's estimate at that time.
How about the warning that appears on the packages of every cigarette, which clearly says, smoking, without equivocation, without any weasel words, smoking causes lung cancer, heart disease, and emphysema? Is that an inaccurate statement in your opinion, or is it accurate?
I think from a public health perspective, that's a very accurate statement. It should be there in a public health perspective context. You make it seem as if this other definition is just sort of out in the ether somewhere. And in fact, the other definition of cause is important for scientists who want to unlock the secrets of cancer. Find out what it is that in fact is perhaps making this happen.
Now, on page 2 of the 1979 Surgeon General's report, Roman numeral 2, and you've told us how proud you are of your association with the Council for Tobacco Research. Secretary Califano, the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, says, Roman numeral 2. Yeah. You know, it's the second page. This paragraph, top. This is the 79.
And what's the exhibit number?
I think we better have a sidebar here.
1153, Judge.
I think that original was in there. Yeah, I said it, but I didn't want to be too long. It's right in here. I'll show you where it is. That's the one that's evidence. And that's the one, and I think they're already stamped. Right. That's the evidentiary. And that's the no, that's evidence. No, I'm sorry. This is evidence. This is simply, what do you call it? ID. Yeah. That's ID. That one's evidence. Okay, you bet.
Okay, Dr. McAllister, getting back to the 1979 Surgeon General's report, the Secretary of, now the Secretary is called the Secretary of Health and Human Services, I guess. Back then it was Health, Education, and Welfare, but you know the title. I mean, that was the #1 person. The Surgeon General was under Secretary Califano of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. On Roman numeral 2, this is what Secretary Califano said in 1979. And when he says 15 years of additional research, he's referring back to the 1964 Surgeon General's report. Quote, 15 years of additional research overwhelmingly ratify the original scientific indictment of smoking as a contributor to disease and premature death. Indeed, even the cigarette industry's own research from January 1964 through December 1973, at a cost of approximately $15 million, confirmed the lethal dangers of cigarette smoke. That was in 1979. It's 18 years later. Do you agree with what Secretary Califano said in 1979 about the lethal dangers of cigarette smoking?
I'd like to know what 15 million he's referring to. I don't know, is that CTR money or is that industry money? I don't know what he's referring to about the industry's contribution.
So you can't answer my question? Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know what he's talking about.
Sure,
sir.
you know what he's talking about.
No, the 15 million I don't know.
He
sir.
says very clearly, the cigarette industry's own research from January 1964 through December 1973 at a cost of approximately $15 million confirmed the lethal dangers of cigarette smoking. My question is, do you agree or disagree with that?
I can't agree if I have no idea what he's talking about, sir.
You have no, do you think that Secretary Califano, when he was talking about the industry's own research, don't you assume that he means $15 million spent by the tobacco companies?
I don't know whether that's CTR research or internal research. I have no idea what he means.
Well, Dr. McAllister, CTR gets all of its money from the tobacco companies. So whether it was done in-house or through CTR, it's still money coming from Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, Lorillard, and Brown and Williamson, correct? There's no mystery about that.
The mystery is only our involvement in it. I take him at his word. Mr. Califano is not somebody who would tell an untruth.
He was the head of the War on Poverty, wasn't he, before he became Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare?
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
I don't know. I think that's correct. I believe that's correct. But
And you
there's
think he's
no
an honest
question.
man?
I think he's an honest man, and I think that other research, I don't know about the tobacco industry research. I really don't. But other research certainly confirmed that the epidemiological associations were correct 15 years or 18 years, whatever it was, after the original statement.
Well, let me go back to the very first sentence, which doesn't talk about money. Tell me if you agree or disagree with Secretary Califano's statement, quote, 15 years of additional research overwhelmingly ratify the original scientific indictment of smoking as a contributor to disease and premature death.
That's a little colorful, but there's no question that additional epidemiological evidence came out to make that association between tobacco use and disease.
Haven't you read in the literature a survey conducted by Dr. Michael Cummings, who's testified in this case, that a survey was done of members of the Scientific Advisory Board asking them the question as to whether they believe cigarette smoking causes lung cancer, and the results were overwhelmingly that they did. There's testimonies in it.
My understanding, sir, was that Dr. Cummings' survey was of grantees, not of the board. I didn't realize that he was responsible for surveying the board.
What were the results, if in fact he surveyed grantees who received money from the Council for Tobacco Research, after making grant applications, what were the numbers? How many of the grantees believed that cigarette smoking, in fact, causes lung cancer, without any equivocation or talking about epidemiology or risk or association, but accepted the word cause?
My recollection of that may be imperfect. Although the response wasn't terribly high, of those that did respond, I remember that there was generally, I think his setup was agree somewhat or agree strongly or disagree somewhat or disagree strongly. My recollection is that in terms of lung cancer, the vast majority of people either agreed strongly or agreed somewhat.
You can't point to any member of the Scientific Advisory Board, can you, who publicly takes the position it has not been scientifically proven that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. Isn't that right?
I don't know the stance of any individual person. I don't know any of them who would disagree with my assessment that it hasn't been found, but I also don't know any who would take a stand and say that smoking does not cause lung cancer.
I think I got sidetracked when I asked you the earlier question. If you could name one medical doctor anywhere in the United States who never received 10 cents from the tobacco industry, who accepts the tobacco industry's position that it has not been scientifically established in 1997 that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. Can you name one?
I don't know any individual stance. I also say I can't imagine one that wouldn't accept the evidence that there is there's association that they call causal from an epidemiological standpoint. I also can't imagine one saying, yes, I know what the link is that does it. Those are not inconsistent positions.
You don't think it's an inconsistent position for, on the one hand, to say, does cigarette smoking cause cancer? I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I admit that there's a statistical link, and epidemiologically there's an association between smoking and cancer and heart disease, but it hasn't been scientifically proven that cigarette smoking causes disease. You don't think that's inconsistent with a clear, unequivocal statement which accepts the fact, as the Surgeon General's warning, cigarette smoking causes lung cancer, heart disease, and emphysema? You see no inconsistency there.
I don't, Mr. Rosenblatt,
Okay,
because I think that the scientific definition remains to be uncovered. And that's the scientific definition, and I have no quarrel with the Surgeon General or public health officials who would like to restrict smoking. No quarrel at all.
And therefore you have no quarrel with the public health officials who, for the same reason, they're concerned about the public health, want to ban smoking in public buildings, restaurants, airplanes, and so forth, correct?
That's a little bit different. Again, we're talking what I perceive, and I perceive that those statistical associations are not nearly as strong. I haven't really come to a conclusion about that myself.
Have you ever gotten an application by some researcher who wanted to research environmental tobacco smoke?
Yes, we have supported a number of applications in that area. I don't know how many. Not a lot. Certainly we have supported an awful lot of research on components of tobacco smoke and tobacco smoke delivery, ways to deliver tobacco smoke to test animals. There's been an awful lot of stuff on tobacco smoke itself, and a few articles on environmental tobacco smoke have come out, I think.
I think counsel had asked you about the 1996 annual report of the Council for Tobacco Research. No, I think it was up there. The last time I looked, it was on that chair.
That's right.
Is it 96, Council for Tobacco Research?
It's the beige book.
You know, I looked under one heading over the lunch hour, and one area is cell biology research. And I counted about 167 papers on cell biology research. Danny, it's on page 9. Can you find any mention of tobacco in those 167 articles?
If you spent the entire hour looking for it, I expect I can. That doesn't mean that these are not studies that relate to diseases that have been linked to tobacco. We don't do an awful lot of direct tobacco-related research now, smoke-related research. We did much more back in the 60s and in the 70s. You don't keep doing the same experiment over and over again. Once you do experiments on the tobacco itself or on smoke itself, you don't keep doing the experiment. You start looking at ways to unlock secrets of the diseases that are associated with it or how it might be caused. And cell biology is certainly fundamental to a variety of diseases. Cell biology is where most medical sciences is right now.
And that's certainly where the focus of the Council for Tobacco Research is, at the molecular level. Cells, molecules, genetics. That's the main focus in the last 20 years, isn't it?
10 years to 20 years. Yes, because that's where medical science is, Mr. Rosenblatt.
Well, medical science is a lot of places. I'm not asking about medical science in general. That's where the Council for Tobacco Research certainly is, correct?
Along with the rest of the
what?
Medical
the
science.
Universe. Okay. Now, Mr. Moody introduced through you a statement of policy, the Council for Tobacco Research General Policy, which says the Council for Tobacco Research is dedicated to supporting the investigation of fundamental matters relating to a connection between tobacco use and human health. Now, all those studies under cell biology are not doing that. They are not studying the connection between tobacco use and disease. They are simply studying disease, correct?
Mr. Rosenblatt, we accept the connections. We don't have to establish the connections. The connections are there. So you study the disease and in what way tobacco products or smoke might be involved in the causation of those diseases. I don't see anything inconsistent about that at all. You don't keep doing the same experiment year after year after year.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about the 1989 report of the Council for Tobacco Research. At relatively easy one first. Ferritin, an iron storage protein with diverse functions. What has that got to do with tobacco and health?
Tobacco is generally associated with degenerative diseases, arthritis, emphysema, things like that. The most common thread in these degenerative diseases is susceptibility to oxidants, free radicals. We've all heard about free radicals and how to antioxidant vitamins like vitamin E. It turns out iron is a core player in those diseases. So if we can know the role of iron in oxidation reactions and in free radical diseases, we might get a better handle on those diseases. But it's a prime player in degenerative diseases.
But you would agree that the study that I just referred to has nothing in the world directly to do with tobacco.
Smoke, in fact, affects ferritin There's no question that smokers have different levels of ferritin. We have to know what happens to ferritin in order to know how its role in disease may be played out. It's definitely a part of smoking in health.
And how does this, also on page 133 at the bottom, this is just the title of this article. Inactivation of glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase isozymes from human and pig brain by aluminum. What has that got to do with tobacco and health?
It's not nearly as complicated as you make it sound. There are a number of diseases for which tobacco use is actually negatively associated. One of those is Alzheimer's disease. It was early on clear that smokers were not as susceptible to Alzheimer's disease as non-smokers. One of the things that people thought might be a causative agent in Alzheimer's is aluminum. People were afraid of eating out of aluminum pans. People were afraid that aluminum might be a causative agent. As a matter of fact, aluminum is held in senile plaques in Alzheimer's brains. Here's a smoking-related disease with a possible direct cause from aluminum. It's not unreasonable that we would want to support a research project that would study the role of aluminum.
How does any of this help the smoker either in 1997 or 1954 who was concerned with, he's a smoker, he likes to smoke, and has one question. He's not worried about any of the technical stuff, not interested in reading a whole lot of technical articles, just wants to know, does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer? How does the studies we've just talked about help him answer that question and make a rational decision about whether he or she should quit smoking or should continue smoking?
Mr. Rosenblatt, we are not giving research grants in order to make people decide about smoking or not smoking. That is a decision they should make with their physician. We support research into the basic etiology of the diseases that are related to smoking.
Now, Dr. McAllister, in the Certificate of Incorporation of the Council for Tobacco Research, it says, the purposes for which it is formed are to aid and assist research into tobacco use and health, and to make available to the public factual information on this subject. And my question is, what factual information are you making available to the public on the question of, does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer and other diseases?
That wasn't part of the Articles of Incorporation, was it? That last statement of yours. I don't see how our Articles of Incorporation are inconsistent with what we've been talking about. You and I have been talking about smoking and disease, tobacco smoking and disease, relationship between them, and I believe that we've been studying that for quite some time. The relationship is established. We're now looking at the causation of the diseases associated with the use of tobacco and how tobacco might possibly impact those. But primarily we're trying to unlock those secrets.
Since you're doing all this great work, and you're interested in the public, and you're doing the same kind of research that all these other public health organizations are doing, why is it that the American Lung Association won't accept your money and won't accept in its publication articles written by researchers who have taken money from the Council for Tobacco Research?
Well, you probably know that's a very recent position. And that position is one which I believe is one that they chose because they thought their feeling was that it was inconsistent with their image of a public health organization to accept those articles. I believe those are the only journals that don't accept our publications. And of course, we have many, many articles that have appeared in those publications over the years. And I think they simply came, you notice they never said anything about the quality of the journal articles themselves. They never said anything about the quality of the scientists. They simply felt that they should not accept those articles, and my guess is it was because it was an ethical position for them.
They thought it would be unethical to take tobacco money. Money, profits that are made from a habit or addiction that the American Lung Association believes, as does the public health community, kills over 430 Americans every year.
Yes, it is. Sustained injury.
And what about the American Thoracic Society? They all likewise will not accept money from CTR, and they will not publish anything by a grantee of CTR in their publication. Is that correct?
Those are the same two publications. It's the same organization.
How about Massachusetts General Hospital, which is the main teaching hospital of Harvard Medical School? Why is it that they won't take your money?
Well, I should say we have 17 current grants at Harvard Medical School now. They just don't go to the hospital. We do have grants at Children's Hospital associated with Harvard, with Beth Israel's Hospital associated
But
with
I'm
Harvard.
asking you about Mass General. I'm asking you about Mass
He
General.
was trying, just please, three of us can't talk at the same time. I think he was trying to answer the question, so sustain the objection.
It's true that the Massachusetts General Hospital and Brigham and Women's Hospital, two of the hospitals in the large Harvard complex, have also decided, for whatever reason, that it would compromise their standards of something to accept money. But we have no problem giving money to Harvard Medical School. Many of the people who have appointments in Massachusetts General Hospital also have appointments in the medical school. We fund them through the medical school. They don't seem to find it's a problem.
Can you cite me one other instance of any organization in America that provides money for researchers in the area of health and disease where any potential grantee or recipient of money has said, we refuse to take your money on moral or ethical grounds? Or is that unique with respect to the Council for Tobacco Research's money?
I think it's unique with the American Thoracic Society and Massachusetts General Hospital and Massachusetts Brigham and Women's Hospital, and a couple of others.
Now, Dr. Glenn is your boss, correct?
Yes, sir.
He is the president and he is the CEO of the Council for Tobacco Research, and I think he has a third title. President, CEO.
Those are the two that I know him by, sir. He may have another.
Okay. And you basically have three titles. You're research director, you're scientific director, and you are vice president for research. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, when I took your deposition and asked you certain questions about Dr. Glenn, I believe you said that you see him about once a week and he still maintains some kind of medical practice in Kentucky. Is that still the case?
I see him when he is in New York. He's there 2.5 days a week. So once a week, yes, for 2.5 days.
Does he still have maintain his medical practice in Kentucky?
To the best of my knowledge, he does.
You would certainly agree that the Council for Tobacco Research is not a public health policy organization, correct?
I would agree with that.
Now, special projects are entirely different from the grant application procedure you described to Mr. Moody with respect to grant applications that come through the front door, correct?
I'm not sure I agree with this front door, but yes, they are different in many ways.
When I took your deposition, I think it was in late 1993, well, let me get you the exact date, December 6, 1993 in New York, you had at that time been with the Council for Tobacco Research for 10 years. And I asked you what you knew about special projects, and you basically said you knew next to nothing, correct?
That was correct.
And you remember that there was a time problem in taking your deposition. You only had a certain amount of time available the first day, so we continued it the next day.
I thought we ran until the end of the afternoon. I didn't think we had a time
I
problem.
think we-
just ran out of time. It was supper time.
Whatever. But we went into the next day, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the next day, we had a discussion about whether or not there were any special project files on the premises of the Council for Tobacco Research, correct? You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And you said there were. They were about 10 feet away from your office. A filing cabinet with one or two drawers related to special projects, correct?
I said it's actually a little further than that, but yes, they're
Okay.
there.
Of course, we were taking your deposition in a lawyer's office. I was not on the premises of CTR at the time you were deposed, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you never opened the drawer and looked through the filing cabinet to see what special projects were. That was your testimony, correct?
That was correct.
You never had the curiosity to do that.
That's correct. I didn't. I had a full-time job doing other things besides special projects.
Now, I want you to assume that Mr. Gertenbach has testified in this case by way of deposition, and I want you to assume that he has said the following things about special projects.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure where we're going with that. Yeah, I guess you better talk to Sam Brown.
Yeah, it's fine. Another couple of cups in there.
I believe you said earlier that Mr. Gertenbach was at CTR when you were hired in 1983. He was there, but he wasn't president. He became president a little later.
That's right.
Okay. When Gertenbach became president, did he discuss with you special projects and the manner in which he was informed of a particular, how he first learned of a particular special project and the procedure that would be used with respect to a special project?
Not at all.
Okay, so you're telling us you never had any conversation whatsoever with Mr. Gertenbach about any special project at any time?
Any individual special project at any time. That's correct.
Well, how about generally? Did you ever discuss with Mr. Gertenbach the general procedure of how he would learn of a special project, or
No.
how he would learn of the identity of a researcher who was going to do a particular special project?
No, sir.
Did you ever have any discussion with Mr. Gertenbach or anybody else at CTR about special projects?
No.
Your answer is no.
That's right.
Okay.
Only that they existed, nothing in depth. I was told that they existed. I didn't pursue it. I was simply made aware that they existed.
Now, wait a second. You're saying that you were told special projects existed, you knew they were different from the regular applications that were made for grants, and you're telling us you didn't have the curiosity to say, well, what are they? How do they work? How are they different?
That's correct. I didn't.
Because
I
you
think I've told
you were
you
so
that.
busy doing other things.
I believe that's what I said, and
Okay.
I agree with that. Yes.
Okay. Now, you do know that special projects, whatever they were, you don't know what they were, but whatever they were, they had absolutely nothing to do with the normal grant application process or with the Scientific Advisory Board.
In my job, working with the Grant and Aid Program and the Scientific Advisory Board, I was never asked to look at or deal with special projects. I
Okay.
certainly knew of their existence, and Mr. Gertenbach had told me that they existed, and I don't think we had any substantive discussions about them, though. Certainly nothing about how they came in, how they were selected, nothing like that.
But in terms of all the meetings of the Scientific Advisory Board that you attended over the years during your employment with the Council for Tobacco Research, never at any time did the subject of special projects come up. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So therefore
That's to
you
my
know, I would assume, tell me if I'm right or wrong, therefore you would know that whatever special projects were, they totally bypassed the Scientific Advisory Board.
That would be, yes, that's correct.
Now, I'm going to be asking Dr. McAllister some questions from a deposition that he gave in another matter on August 5, 1997. You have the transcript. Page 89. Line 6. Well, right now, I'm going to go from line 6 through line 15. Then I'm going to continue because the next 2 or 3 pages address the same topic.
There we-
Okay, Dr. McAllister, this is the deposition in another matter that was taken of you quite recently, August 5, 97, page 89, line 6. You were asked this question, and you gave this answer. Question. We are talking about Robert Gertenbach. Mr. Gertenbach was the person that you recalled having mentioned to you that attorneys were involved in discussions about special project topics. Answer yes. So now, in August, you remembered that Gertenbach told you that somehow attorneys were involved with special projects. And I understood you today to say you didn't know anything about special projects.
I thought your question was, did he discuss with me about the mechanism by which they came in?
No.
And he didn't do that.
No, I asked you that question at one point, then I asked you a broader question about whether you knew anything about special projects. I thought you said no.
I knew that they existed. That's
Yeah.
right. Now,
But you didn't know
you have
anything
to
about them.
pinpoint the time frame. I gradually, over a period of time, became aware that lawyers were involved, but how they were involved, I didn't know.
Does this ring a bell?
Okay.
Whether you heard it from Mr. Gertenbach or Dr. Glenn or anybody at CTR, that the way a special project would first be learned of in the offices of the Council for Tobacco Research, the president would get a call from a lawyer saying the tobacco companies wanted a particular kind of research, and that they would get a call from one designated researcher and basically to rubber stamp that application, and that was a special project. Totally different from the grant application which you've described earlier. Does that ring a bell to you?
The process that you described, not the rubber stamp part, but the process you described, I have only learned about since the deposition taken in August.
I see. So, up until, I'm trying to think, is it still September, or are we into, I guess it's September 30th. So as of last month, when your deposition was taken, you didn't know about that procedure with a lawyer calling the president of CTR saying the tobacco companies wanted a particular kind of research. You've learned about that since.
That's correct.
Okay.
I knew that lawyers were involved, but the process I only learned of this last month.
Did you ever know why lawyers were involved? I mean, it's scientific research. Why are lawyers involved?
There's lawyers involved in all kind of research. There's probably very few of our grantees that don't on the side consult for biotech companies or pharmaceutical companies, and lawyers are involved in those research projects from top to bottom.
Hopefully
It's perfectly reasonable for for attorneys to be involved in research, not in our grant and aid program. That is not what we're talking about. But it's not unusual for attorneys to be involved with contracts or even basic research problems. It happens all the time.
Of course, Dr. McAllister, with respect to the pure scientific research that's going on in a laboratory, or the pure science when scientists are talking to each other and you're not talking about negotiating a contract and you're not talking about money, lawyers would have no involvement in that, in the pure research end.
That's not always true, unfortunately, Mr. Rosenblatt. Even in very pure research, if there are commercial implications of that very pure research, at some point a lawyer has to be involved because there's going to be a patent, there's going to be a contract, there's going to be an affiliation.
Why was the more particularized information about special projects hidden from you during your 14-year tenure at the Council for Tobacco Research?
I was never forbidden from looking in those drawers. I was never told not to go look at special projects. Forbidden is the wrong word. I told you I wasn't interested. I had another job. I liked my job. I had no interest to look at special projects.
Does the name Leonard Zahn ring a bell to you, Z-A-H-N?
I knew Mr. Zahn.
Did he attend? He was a public relations guy, Leonard Zahn, wasn't it?
Did he attend, sir?
Let me go back to this question. Wasn't Leonard Zahn a public relations guy?
He was a public relations consultant, yes.
Okay. Sure as heck was not a scientist. Didn't have a Ph.D. in anything, did he?
No.
Okay.
He was a competent science writer, but he was not a scientist.
What was he doing sitting in on meetings of the Scientific Advisory Board?
Mr. Zahn's duties when I came were primarily to get to do the collection of reprints for the annual reports, or I should more appropriately say to proofread the final versions of the annual report. He also attended meetings in various parts of the world on topics that had to do with tobacco and tobacco-related diseases. He would report back to us. He had a clipping service, and he, I think, was at the Scientific Advisory Board largely for his own edification, to keep him current with what science was doing, and he also had to write the press release at the end of the year, or really the beginning of the next year, when we published our annual report. But by the time I came, the only public relations job that he had was to write the was to write the press release for the annual report.
Dr. McAllister, you believe, don't you, that what CTR does in the field of research doesn't have any influence whatsoever on the public at large?
Not directly, because the public doesn't read our article. Well, the unusual generalist or person at large might read our scientific publications, but usually it takes a scientist to interpret them. So directly, I don't think we have any influence. I think that it has to be our stuff does have to be interpreted, at least by reading our annual report or by people who look at the output themselves. That is, the publications themselves. But we'd be surprised, I would be surprised, if the average person on the street would read articles in scientific journals that we had sponsored.
Has any of the research funded by the Council for Tobacco Research discovered the mechanism that causes any form of cancer?
There has been some suggestive, I meant to say, evidence. Some of our grantees are working with some of the molecules that are found in cigarette smoke and how the body changes them, and those molecules, how they interact with genes. It's a very suggestive kind of relationship. It doesn't prove that that's the way smoking might possibly cause disease in some people, but we definitely have supported research that would look in those directions, yes, sir.
But you haven't come up with anything definitive as yet in terms of discovering the mechanism of any form of cancer?
It's a very complex problem. Before he joined us, C.C. Little worked on it for 50 years. You shouldn't be surprised that we haven't found anything that's a direct link in the subsequent 40 years. It's a very, very tough problem. Otherwise, if it weren't so tough, it would have been solved by now, regardless of CTR.
But you would agree that the public health community, the Surgeon General since 1964, are sufficiently satisfied with the scientific evidence that they recommend to the American people very clearly. If you're a smoker, in the interest of your health, you should quit. If you're not a smoker, don't start. Correct? Those are the public health recommendations, without knowing the precise mechanism.
The public health recommendations based on epidemiological evidence, clearly they have taken that position, no fault with that at all.
And the very clear public health recommendations with respect to secondhand smoke are, you should ban it in public buildings, airplanes, other forms of transportation, restaurants, correct?
Those are the public health recommendations. I myself am not satisfied that they're statistically significant, but that's just my own opinion.
That's your view as a chemist. Is that
I'm not a
correct?
statistician, and I don't know epidemiology. I just know that normally we look for stronger associations to prove things than are available in environmental tobacco smoke. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying usually we look for stronger evidence.
I want to ask you a question about, I believe this is Plaintiff's Exhibit 1018, Request for Medical Advice. It's a one-page exhibit. Do you have it, Joe? You've got it? Yes. Okay. You're familiar with the form I'm talking about?
No, sir.
Why don't you just take a look at
Sure.
it? Don't pay any attention to my notes.
Be better if you got a clean copy.
Okay.
Switch. You've read it?
I've read it, yes.
Okay. Now, as I read this, I understand it to mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, if a consumer or a customer of one of the tobacco companies calls and asks a question about whether cigarette smoking or secondhand smoke causes disease, this is a standard response they'll get?
Mr. Rosenblatt, I've never seen this in any form. I've never seen it used, not used. It's obviously written by a non-scientist. I have no idea if it's a draft, if it ever went out. It obviously is a form, but I have no idea if it was ever used.
You just never saw this before?
I have never seen this before, that's correct, before this moment.
You know who it's signed, at least the name appears, there's no actual signature, W.T. Hoyt, Executive Director.
I see that.
Who was Mr. Hoyt?
He was the executive director of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. We can put it in time simply because we know it has to have been sometime in the early 60s. It has 1960 blank, at which time, of course, there was a considerable debate. Even the editorial in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1960 said neither the proponents or the opponents of the tobacco theory can conclusively claim a victory. So there was still, of course, an open question. But that doesn't say anything about Mr. Hoyt. Mr. Hoyt, of course, as you know, is not a scientist, and I don't know if this ever went to anyone.
Mr. Hoyt does say in this letter, follow along with me, the second sentence, "We can, however, assure you that our scientific advisory board, composed of a group of distinguished independent scientists, as well as many other distinguished and reputable men of science, continue to believe that there is no conclusive evidence establishing tobacco use as harmful to the public health." Would you say that today?
I would say that I don't know if Mr. Hoyt is empowered to speak for the Scientific Advisory Board. I have no idea if he ever consulted them. I have no idea if they had any input into this memorandum.
That's not my question, Dr. McAllister. My question is, would you say today that the Scientific Advisory Board of the Council for Tobacco Research, or you yourself, continue to believe that there is no conclusive evidence establishing tobacco use is harmful to the public health?
Of course not. Of course I don't believe that. There is enough epidemiological evidence to make public health determinations. That doesn't mean that we found the cause. It doesn't mean it's not worth looking at. Doesn't mean it's not worth looking for.
But in practical, common sense terms, you have absolutely no quarrel with the public health recommendation at a very practical, common sense level. If you're a smoker, it's better for your health to quit. If you're a non-smoker, don't start. You have no quarrel with that.
I don't have a quarrel with that from a public health perspective. I think there might have been some question when Mr. Hoyt was writing this letter.
Now, did I understand you to say on direct examination that a member of the Scientific Advisory Board can himself or herself get their own personal research funded if it's approved by the rest of the Scientific Advisory Board?
I don't remember if that was indirect testimony, but it certainly is true that, like NIH, people that serve on NIH study sections get NIH grants. People that serve on CTR, Scientific Advisory Board, can get CTR grants.
And there's no conflict, for example, if someone is on the Scientific Advisory Board and they're connected with let's say, the University of Miami. They would not be in a conflict situation if they voted as to whether or not the University of Miami should receive funding.
If they were from the University of Miami?
Yeah.
Oh, no, they have to step out of the room. They cannot be involved in that discussion. They can have no input whatsoever.
The Scientific Advisory Board is just that. It's an advisory board. And you and Dr. Glenn have the power to overrule them. Isn't that true?
I've told you how we do it. I think overrule is not right. I think we take their advice, and I think we take it very seriously. It's only in the very last couple of grants where we may go slightly out of numeric order. And I have to tell you, those numbers are so close, it's statistically insignificant. But I don't think of that as overruling. I think of that as taking their advice. They've told us to do that.
You and Dr. Glenn have the power and authority to grant funding to someone who has received less points from the Scientific Advisory Board than someone who has received more. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. Frankly, the difference is awfully small, but yes, we do have that power. Authority.
Now, in answering some of Mr. Moody's questions, you talked about some of the members of your scientific advisory board publishing in some very prestigious publications, and that they were members of the National Academy of Sciences. The National Academy of Sciences is a very prestigious, recognized organization. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the 1986 report of the National Academy of Sciences on environmental tobacco smoke?
I think I've seen it. I don't remember it in detail, but I think I've seen it, yes.
Now, the National Academy of Sciences in 1986 reached the same conclusion that the Surgeon General reached in 1986, which was that environmental tobacco smoke is a cause of lung cancer in healthy non-smokers, correct?
Yes, I believe that was the conclusion of the report. You also have to realize that the sponsorship is National Academy. It doesn't have to be comprised of National Academy members. They simply sponsor the study under their auspices. I'm not detracting from the quality of the study.
Did I understand correctly that in the history of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, which began in 1954 and became the Council for Tobacco Research, that in those 43 years, the tobacco companies have given out about $300 million for research?
Yes.
You know that the tobacco industry spends way more than that in 1 year on advertising, don't you?
I've heard that, yes.
Now, this is part of plaintiff's composite exhibit. Did you say 453?
Yes.
453. 1470. This is a news release on Leonard Zahn, Public Relations Counsel. Let me show this to you, Dr. McAllister.
It was part of the 453.
What's the part? let's take a break, folks.